Before we get started today, I did want to give you a quick update on some of the upcoming NABS initiatives that we've got. We're delighted to introduce a new initiative, Mind Your Melon, which is a practical mental health and wellbeing initiative focused on building resilience, increasing awareness of early signs of stress, and creating a space for open, supportive conversations. The first session will be held on the 7th of May from 12 to 1 Australian Central Standard Time, and anyone is welcome to join. On the 22nd of May, we have our next Lunch with Leaders session, and this month we'll be joined by Dr. Catherine Clift. Catherine is the Independent Biosecurity Commissioner for New South Wales and has extensive knowledge of biosecurity gained from various roles in Australia and New Zealand. Catherine also has dyslexia and is going to talk to us about her challenge with a disability in this space as well. On Wednesday, the 27th of May, from 12:30 to 1:30 Australian Central Standard Time, we have our next think tank with Rachel O'Brien from the Australian Lot Feeders Association. While Rachel's presentation will focus on preparedness for lot feeders, the session will provide you with the space to consider how their solutions or other approaches might be of value to your industry or organisation, and what opportunities there might be for you to utilise this knowledge in new or novel ways. If you're interested in any of the initiatives I've just mentioned or any of our other programs, please check out the What's On page on the Animico website. And if you're not on our email distribution list and you would like to be, please don't hesitate to shoot me an email and I'll make sure that you get put on. And just before we wanted to move on, I wanted to let you know that there will be a survey at the end of today's session. We're particularly interested in your feedback on whether the session was of value or not, but also any other potential issues or speakers you'd like to see invited to present to you. So I now wanted to talk a little bit about the NABS Biosecurity Think Tank. These sessions are designed to be more than a standard webinar. The purpose is to spark ideas, trigger different ways of thinking, and help you to consider how the approaches shared today might be translated into your own context. As we hear from Jess, I encourage you to focus less on the specifics of the sector and more on the underlying ideas and approaches being used. Consider what challenges in your own organisation or industry this might relate to, what elements could be adapted, and how this thinking might strengthen preparedness or response in your context. Rather than looking for immediate answers during the presentation, I invite you to listen for one strong idea that you can take away and reshape for your own work. With that in mind, I'll leave you with a guiding reflection. What is the one idea from today that you could adapt? And what could it look like if you applied it in the next week or month or year? We're not looking for immediate solutions during the presentation. We're looking for one meaningful idea that you can translate into action afterwards. As I mentioned before, at the end of today's session, there will be time to ask Jess questions, as well as to generate discussion among the group. It's now my pleasure to introduce Jessica Lye. Jessica joined Citrus Australia in June 2021 to coordinate CitrusWatch, a national citrus industry biosecurity preparedness and exotic pest surveillance program. She has extensive experience across preparedness, response and management activities for a range of exotic pests and diseases. Prior to this role, Jessica was Biosecurity Manager at AusVeg and a researcher and science communicator at CSER Australia. Today, Jess is going to provide us with an overview of HLB disease impacts on overseas citriculture and outline current efforts within the Australian citrus industry to support early detection of HLB disease pathogens. Welcome, Jess.
Thank you very much, Anne. I'll just get this shared. Now, I have to make a little correction because I might have sent the wrong bio through. So today I'm actually going to be speaking less about HLB and overseas impacts and more about some of the initiatives that we have been undertaking at Citrus Australia around data gathering and data analysis to help us with our planning, biosecurity preparedness and decision making. So I'll just check before I move on. Can you hear me okay, Anne?
I can, Jess. Go ahead.
Great. Okay, so Yeah, look, I hope what I present today does manage to generate a few ideas within your organisations. Just a little bit of background. Anne did mention HLB. ACP, or Asian Citrus Psyllid, which is the vector of the pathogen that causes Huanglongbing disease in citrus, is definitely the major threat for the citrus industry. It's caused major impacts to citriculture overseas, and we are trying to avoid that, and we're doing early detection surveillance and all sorts of preparedness activities for the disease. But in saying that, there are plenty of exotic pests and pathogens that could impact our industry. We've got 29 high priority pests listed in our biosecurity plan and many more on our watch list. So we, as an industry, we have a lot to do in terms of biosecurity preparedness, and we are not particularly resource heavy in the biosecurity department. So to help us with our thinking around the preparedness activities we need to focus on over the next few years, back in 2023, we developed an industry strategy for biosecurity, and it's got different priority areas. The priority area that I'm going to focus on today is data and information, because I mentioned at CA we are resource poor in biosecurity, and governments are increasingly becoming resource poor as we're getting more and more incursions into the country. So we need to be more efficient about where we're placing our energies for the purpose of biosecurity preparedness. So we want good data to underpin our decisions. It's really the 80-20 rule. So I'm just including some of our activity areas under the strategy and the activities themselves to guide us through this presentation. We've got a very detailed implementation plan that sits under the strategy that defines the kind of activities we want to do over the next few years. One of them is mapping citrus production around Australia. For a number of years, we've mapped citrus production really so we can forecast future production, understand oversupply risks before they happen, provide a steer for industry to help with planting decisions, and also understand where our citrus is being grown if there is a natural disaster. Obviously, this type of information can aid in recovery efforts, it can help us understand the economic impacts from natural disasters like pest incursions, or it can aid us in helping to manage and provide advice during pest responses if we're talking biosecurity. So that takes me to the development of a platform that we call Citrus Block Builder. It's our geospatial citrus mapping and industry analytics platform that we've been building over the years with the Applied Agricultural Remote Sensing Centre at UNE for the past 5 years. So through Citrus Block Builder, we aim to understand where commercial citrus production blocks are and to understand the locations and the volume of critical supply chain infrastructure across Australia. So I want to mention the two major data inputs that contribute to Citrus Block Builder. And the first one is called the Australian Tree Crop Map. You might have come across it in the past. The group at UNE, the Applied Ag Remote Sensing Centre group, have created a really great map that's open access online that shows through satellite sensing the locations of major horticultural products around Australia. So they have been working closely with Paul Stevens at Citrus Australia to build the Citrus Block Builder. The second important data input for the Block Builder is our citrus tree census. So when growers apply to us for annually to enter into the annual export program for Korea, China and Thailand, we get them to fill out a tree census. So we ask them how many trees they're growing, what varieties they're growing, the ages of the trees. We get information on tree spacing, planting density, that sort of thing, and locations of their blocks. So each year we undertake this. It's really important information for talking to industry about national and regional plantings. It helps when we give out this information in a booklet form and in presentations. It helps them understand where they might put their investment in future in terms of varietal planting. It helps assist citrus industry when looking at investments into packing and logistics, and it also helps with market development researchers, R&D needs as well. and undertaking investment decisions for that. So here's just an example of the kind of information that CTC gives us. It gives us information on varietal plantings at a regional scale, so we are able to break it down into all of our major and some of our minor production regions as well. And as you can see on the slide here, it gives us information on the varieties by region, the scale of production of each variety in that region. We also have information on the age of trees, the volume of trees entering production, so non-bearing but soon to be entering production, those that are bearing, and those trees that are currently in decline. So this work at CA is led by Mara Milner in the market development team. So back to Citrus Block Builder. By combining the UNE satellite data that you can see in the left-hand image here with the citrus tree census data, we get a map that looks more like the image on the right. So we've got the satellite data showing us where the citrus blocks are and polygons around each of those blocks. Then we've overlaid that information with the citrus tree census data. You can see some blocks are a different colour. That means they're a different variety. They also have unique identification numbers per block. And we can also overlay data such as, like I said, the tree age, the rootstock, even the row spacing, so understanding planting densities. That obviously helps us start to understand like the economic value of citrus production by region, because we can start to understand per block the volume of citrus coming off those trees and do some forecasting for industry. So more recently, we've added, or UNE have added for us, an analytics dashboard, and that gives us further granular insights. And I've just supplied 2 examples of the kind of insights we're getting out of the dashboard at the moment. It's still a work in progress, but we can definitely see the potential here. So using the information in Citrus Block Builder, we're able to have a look at a high level scale, how much of our citrus is early season citrus, mid-season, and also late season. So we can start to understand production and harvesting across the year, what regions are going to be harvesting for longer, later into the year, where is the supply going to come from. We can also look at things like planting years for different varieties. So as an example, I've put planting years for a bunch of different varieties on the graph here. You can see the purple data point, which is the top data point of that graph. That's Aphora. That obviously had a big planting year in around 2023. In a biosecurity sense, this kind of information is really useful because obviously we have exotic pests and diseases that have high impacts on different varieties of citrus. So we can start to look at the risk posed to our industry at a more granular level, looking at the risk to different varieties and then looking at the risk to different regions that might grow high levels of those varieties or will have high production of them in the future based on recent plantings. And tracking the data obviously allows us to circulate advice to industry, such as, maybe rethink putting in more lemons this year. And it gives us a basis for conducting economic analyses for the industry, such as economic impact if we were to get Huanglongbing in the country. So we go through, or Paul Stevens, I should say, at CA, goes through quite a lot of work verifying the satellite data supplied by UNE. So he will take that data and overlay the CTC information, and then he goes out and looks at citrus blocks. He uses Google Map View. He uses a variety of methods, calling growers as well, to verify the blocks and make sure those citrus blocks are in fact citrus blocks. So at the moment, we have about 33,000 hectares of verified blocks. There's around 9,000 hectares still to verify. It keeps Paul very busy, but at least we know that the data set is high quality. The citrus blocks are obviously in flux, so we always need a person working at CA on this activity, or else the data set will get out of date quite quickly. So at the moment, Paul and UNE are going through the process of identifying future blocks. So UNE have some very nifty software that and satellite imagery that enables them to identify very early plantings of citrus. And they've also been, through that same process, identifying citrus that is in decline and most likely abandoned, so we can further refine forecasts for the industry. And those abandoned orchards obviously pose a biosecurity risk for us as well. So it's great information for us to know. We can gear our biosecurity surveillance towards those areas. We can gear our engagement towards those areas to try and get some management happening of those blocks, or have them taken out. Just quickly, there is a severe weather layer that could be integrated with Citrus Block Builder. It hasn't at the moment because UNE is concerned about it slowing down the platform. So at the moment, it sits outside of the Block Builder as an independent application. You can have a look at this app, but obviously for us in particular, you know, ACP, Asian Citrus Psyllid, is found in Papua New Guinea and also in Indonesia and other surrounding countries, and severe weather can pose a risk of bringing it south to Australia, so it's useful having access to this application. So I'm going to move on from the mapping of citrus production, and I'm going to talk a little bit about another activity we wanted to do through our biosecurity strategy, which is to understand supply chain infrastructure for the industry, and also starting to look at seasonal movement of citrus fruit around the country. So we now have a biosecurity layer for within Citrus Block Builder, so it's an additional layer of information. Paul Stevens has been doing a superb job tracking down and identifying different types of sites, infrastructure involved in the supply chain. So at the moment, he's managed to place 857 different production and retail nurseries that sell citrus into Citrus Block Builder, so we know the locations of those. We also have been able to place 102 pack sheds into the Block Builder, and we're proceeding to place sites involved in cold storage, citrus transport and logistics in there as well. So understanding the flow of citrus from the farm to the pack shed to cold logistics, and understanding if it's taken by truck or rail to the next point, that's the story we're trying to build and trying to understand. It becomes, this kind of industry insight becomes very important, particularly if we do have to participate in a response. We did some training with AgVic and PHA a couple of years ago on a war game for BMSB, or brown marmorated stink bug, and it was around understanding the role of industry liaison officers in a response. And during that workshop, it became very evident that industry liaison officers may have excellent knowledge of their locality in which they are working, but they also need to come to responses armed with a package of information to provide industry insights into the supply chain at a larger scale to help with operation of a response and rollout of a response plan. So on this layer, where possible, we include information on the size of the business, an estimate of the fruit volumes that it's dealing with, and where the fruit is moving to. So we're starting to paint that picture. We've been dabbling in peri-urban and urban citrus, so trying to get an understanding of how many citrus trees are found in major cities such as Melbourne and Sydney. We've really only dabbled at this stage. UNE have helped us scrape information from a public data set called Public Fruit Melbourne Map. It's basically a map for people who want to do some urban foraging of fruit, not pay for it, and find that around the city. There are quite a few maps like that. Some others are Falling Fruit, Feral Fruit Melbourne, and Wild Fruit Map. So we're thinking if we can get our hands on these data sets from the managers of these applications, we can start including all of these data points in this additional urban citrus layer. It won't give us actual numbers of all citrus trees, obviously, across a metropolitan region, But it could start to give us an idea of where there are perhaps areas of higher densities of citrus in a city, and that can then inform our surveillance planning. We could go out, do some surveillance on those trees. We could also increase our engagement with residents in those areas and try and get them involved in our volunteer psyllid trapping network. So future work, I won't go into this too much, but basically where we would like to be is starting to understand the seasonal movement of citrus fruit around the country, and we need to be realistic. We're never going to get actual numbers of this. Really, we need to consult with industry and start to get ideas of by month where the fruit is moving to, whether it's going to Adelaide or Melbourne or going across from Riverina to a pack shed in Sunraysia before coming down to Melbourne, what varieties are being moved, estimates of what volumes, how many are going to export and how many are staying in the state. So this kind of information obviously can be really beneficial when understanding the economic impact of possible movement controls that might be put in place during a response, but also looking at spread pathways, for instance. Is this a risk spread pathway, and do we need to do something about it during a response? So I'm going to move on from there because I am going to run short on time otherwise, but I hope the mapping information there has given you some insights and ideas of how you can do that in your own organisations. The next activity I want to talk about is something we've been doing with AusCitrus and New South Wales DPIRD, and it's been an activity that has been a part of a project looking at citrus smuggling, the risk of citrus smuggling, and trying to stop that from happening. So I'm going to be presenting some survey information that we gathered from community members looking at the varietal demand, what citrus they want to see for sale to get their hands on, and the surveys were targeted at citrus urban gardeners. So just as a bit of a background on the community survey that we were doing, we were working with AusCitrus and New South Wales DPIRD, as I mentioned, and these two organisations are in charge of the National Citrus Repository Program. So that's a program that ensures that we have 2 foundation blocks for our citrus varieties in the country that are high health, disease tested, and housed in psyllid-proof screen houses so that they are safe if there is an incursion of ACP, for instance. We have these foundation blocks located at 2 locations, Menangle near Sydney and Dearton, and if we have a response in one region, we still have a foundation block of all of our public citrus varieties in another block. There's about 1,000 kilometres between those 2 locations. So we do have a lot of public varieties that obviously can be found on the market for sale, but we, as an industry, continue to be concerned about the potential for illegal citrus smuggling into the country. Some of you may recall back in 2018, there was someone who actually worked in the citrus industry who obviously didn't want to pay for PEQ or wait for their variety to come through PEQ, and tried to bring a variety of citrus through Brisbane Airport. They hid some bud sticks and an inner tube of a tyre. That was intercepted and picked up, and when the bud sticks were tested, they were found to be infected with Huanglongbing disease. So that was a near miss for the industry. We know that smuggling of citrus bud sticks and other propagation materials like seed does happen. We don't know how much, but it continues to be a concern for the industry that rare varieties that are hard to come by in Australia will instead be smuggled in. So what we want to do with working with AusCitrus and EMAI is understand what kind of varieties are in demand by urban gardeners. What would they like to see on the market? What have they looked for that they can't get their hands on, or maybe a variety that they know from overseas that they would love to have? And find out if we already have that variety in the country, does it need cleaning up and inclusion into the repository program, or can we import that variety through PEQ? So it goes through shoot tip grafting. We get a nice high health variety tree out of it, and then we can start offering that for sale. And then over time, reducing the risk of smuggling of citrus into Australia. So that's the background on the project. Our part in the initial stage of the project was to do some community surveying, as I mentioned. We had a survey for retail nurseries, but I'm not going to talk about that. I'm just going to talk about the survey that we directed at urban gardeners or urban residents who grow citrus. So we went through a process of building a database of community gardens and also community interest groups such as diggers clubs. And we also built a portion of that database around retail nurseries, as I mentioned, although I won't go into that. And we distributed a survey to those groups. And in that survey, we were asking questions about their reasons for growing citrus, what citrus they grow, varieties they would like to source. We were also including some questions around their citrus growing practices, such as how many of them graft their own trees. That's of interest to us because we can direct our education efforts towards those groups. If there's a high number of them grafting their own trees, or maybe we want to do some education around use of high health propagation material with them. So in all, we had 120 responses for this survey. Here's a map of the survey respondents in green. You can just ignore the red and the blue pins. I will say that the map actually only shows 80 pins out of the 120 respondents we had, and that's because we didn't include the question about postcode until a little later on, unfortunately. But you can see we had a bit of a spread around the country, but most pins landed in Melbourne and Sydney. So in terms of level of familiarity with different biosecurity terms or different citrus growing terms, you can see that people were more familiar with terms related to citrus growing, such as grafting or rootstock, disease-free stock, and less familiar with biosecurity terms and disease terms such as citrus greening, HLB, Citrus Tristeza virus. So that was just of interest to us and can inform our education efforts with them. Just as a bit of a summary of results, so a majority of respondents grew citrus in a home garden. So at their home rather than off-site, say at a community garden, for instance. Most respondents, just over half, grew 1 to 5 citrus trees, and then we had about 26% growing 5 to 10 trees, less than that growing 10 or more, and then we had a small portion of them growing no citrus trees. We did still include them in the survey because they did supply information on citrus that they would like to get their hands on. Lemons, unsurprisingly, are most popular, followed by limes and some others like orange and mandarin and tangelo. And about 27% of them graft their own citrus, which was actually a little higher than I was expecting. So that's an education opportunity that we can take on board. Now, mostly people were growing citrus as an ingredient, unsurprisingly, in meals or for beverages, and there were a portion that were using citrus to make preserves or just having a shade or nice to have in the garden, and about 30% were using them for gift giving. We had 39% reply that they had citrus varieties that they would like to source but had difficulty sourcing, which was really interesting. So once we took comments from those people, we were able to develop a ranking system for those we would call rare varieties that they would like to get their hands on. So number one in terms of ranking were different Japanese varieties of citrus, such as yuzu, kabosu, and sudachi, were very popular, came up a lot of times, but difficult to source. So that ranking table will become more relevant in a couple of minutes when I go into this next section. But I want to talk a little bit about some additional work we've been doing around looking at online citrus sales on platforms such as Facebook Marketplace, Gumtree, and Etsy. So this work is linked to the citrus smuggling work. The industry has long had a bit of a concern around what kind of or how much citrus is being sold on these sort of unregulated marketplaces by smaller online sellers that are less likely to be connected in with industry best practice schemes. So less likely to be connected in with a nursery scheme, for instance, and ensuring that their propagation material is disease tested and high health. So there's a risk of, you know, them spreading diseases because they're not aligning themselves with those schemes. So we wanted to be more aware of the risks to industry and understand the level of selling at the moment, what kind of sellers there are different categories of sellers growing. So we've undertaken this analysis twice, once during summer of 22-23 and once during summer of 25-26. So we have a bit of a comparison going now. It's all manual data collection. So we have relied on interns coming in and doing data collection for us, and they both did an amazing job. They spent 4 weeks looking at seller profiles, sellers who are selling citrus on Facebook, as I said, Gumtree, Etsy, and eBay. And we tried to categorize these sellers into different types. So we had minor backyard sellers who were just selling 1 or 2 citrus along with a bunch of other stuff like shoes that they might be selling, just want to get rid of them. We also had a category of major backyard seller who had more than 25 plants on their property at their house, and were selling as a bit of a side hustle business. And then we also had a retail nursery category, which are sellers on these platforms that also had a professional website, might have had a brick and mortar place of business as well. So these are the categories that we were working with. We found 123 sellers in 22-23 and 125 this year. And we just kept looking for sellers until we kind of were confident, I think we've captured all that we can capture here. So it's a subsample of sellers, but I think we probably did a good job at capturing quite a good number of them. Here are some insights. Online seller activity is unsurprisingly strongly concentrated in major cities such as Sydney and Melbourne. New South Wales dominates across all selling platforms in terms of online selling, and that's followed by closely followed by Vic. Facebook Marketplace has been growing much more popular in both New South Wales and Victoria, we saw in the most recent analyses, and eBay and Gumtree are declining in popularity. So looking at the spread of seller categories across locations, most of those minor backyard sellers were located in New South Wales in both years, but in the most recent analyses, we have seen quite a bit of growth in Victoria of that category. Most major backyard sellers are located in Victoria, followed by New South Wales, and then most of the retail nurseries have been located in New South Wales in both years. Gumtree and eBay are declining in popularity, as I mentioned, and Facebook is growing in popularity, particularly for those minor backyard sellers of citrus. There has been a 9% increase overall in the number of backyard sellers across major and minor sellers since the 22-23 analysis. Retail nursery listings, interestingly, have declined over this period from almost 19% to 10%. They must not be getting the returns that they want by using these platforms. In terms of the kind of pest management disease information included on the adverts, very minimal across the board across all categories, but generally, if you're going to get any information about disease testing or pest management, it tends to be in that retail nursery category. In terms of distribution of citrus from the selling point, pickup does dominate, but in saying that, major backyard sellers tend to also rely on delivery and postage services, whereas the minor backyard sellers are relying more on pickup, which means the good thing is, in the case of minor backyard sellers, the citrus is staying more local, most probably. The major backyard sellers, we really don't know, because often they they offered delivery and postage, but the distribution was unspecified. The retail nurseries often offered postage or delivery, but they would specify a region, and usually that region was more local or regional. So the major backyard sellers do pose a major question to have so many citrus in the yard. How are they propagating them? Are they grafting and cutting their own material? And where are they distributing their citrus to? They're potentially a really high risk category for us. Okay, so this is my last slide. I just wanted to tie a link between the online sales analysis and the community survey that we had done for AusCitrus. As I said, we developed like a ranking for in-demand rare citrus varieties, which you can see on the left there. What we found, concerningly, I think, while lemons and limes dominated in terms of selling on the online platforms, and also what's been grown from the community survey, when we did the analysis for online selling this year, we found that rare citrus selling had increased from 13% to 58%, which is a very big jump. And we do know that these varieties are potentially in demand from the surveying that we have done. So you can see on the right a chart that shows just picking out the rare varieties of citrus that are being sold across those different market platforms. You can see that there is actually quite close alignment between what they're selling and the ranking table that we have on the left there. So it's something for us to keep an eye on. I think we really do need to keep undertaking this analysis perhaps every year to try and understand if there's a trend there, particularly if that category of major backyard sellers is on the rise. We probably do need to do some education with those sellers. We need to also have a look at international sellers. We did pick up a few international sellers that were offering to send citrus into the country through this analysis. And we need to most definitely start understanding what kind of education we can do with those major backyard sellers so they're in the know in terms of biosecurity regulations and best growing practices for citrus. I'm a bit over time, so I'm going to leave it there, Anne. I would just like to acknowledge a bunch of people that have worked on all of these activities that I've spoken about today. They've all been a real group effort, and I'd like to thank NABS and Anne for allowing me to speak.
Amazing, Jess. Thank you so much. I had no idea how much work was going on at your end. You're amazing. I guess I have a question for you to start to kick off with. If we think about this as an emerging biosecurity intelligence system, where we're seeing the biggest gap between having data and then actually using it to drive decisions. So it seems to me like that this at the moment is a tool that will help, but how do you actually use this to then drive decisions? And what is that gap and how do we close it?
Yeah, look, at the moment, I think that look, these are very small activities that we've been doing sort of in-house. We've had a little bit of funding through some R&D levies, but we're obviously doing them at a very small scale. And so what I've presented today, particularly for the community survey and the online sales, is really a snapshot of what we think is going on. Ideally, we would be able to do all of these analyses at a larger scale, increase our confidence in the data. And from there, particularly with the online selling analyses, I could see us or another organisation, if they were to take it on, supplying that intelligence to DAF, for instance, in terms of those international sellers who are offering to bring citrus into the country. Get on to them quick, shut them down, send them a warning, whatever needs to be done. And even in the case of those domestic sellers, you know, we can take a softer educational approach, which will only go so far. But, you know, in the future, if we get HLB, we might be facing a situation where we need to mandate how citrus nursery is grown, under screen, disease testing, hygienic conditions. And so we need to have that intelligence to really be able to pin down those sellers and ensure that they're doing the right thing. So I'm not sure if that really answers your question, but I think this kind of activity can be done at a larger scale, probably more professionally. It just gives you a bit of a taster for what can be done, and then understanding, well, where does the data go to block those leaks in the system.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Jess. I really appreciate it. And I guess another question that I had, and I think it follows on a bit from Justin's question in the chat here, was, is there a way to use this information to help drive more community and industry involvement and engagement in biosecurity? And then just so you know, Justin's question says, I'd be interested to hear your potential approach for educating sellers on biosecurity without scaring them off. So I guess they're both really about how do we use what you've done to engage more effectively with the community and industry from a biosecurity perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we try to ensure that if we're doing these activities in CA, there's close alignment with the other projects that we're running that can do, for instance, the education work, so that the work just does not stop with the analysis, that we can take it forward. One of the projects that we've had running for the last few years is the Urban Biosecurity Coordinator project. Jackie Mitchell works at Citrus Australia. She works under the CitrusWatch team umbrella, and she has been doing some fantastic community development work over the last few years, not just in terms of raising awareness about exotic pests and diseases. She's been reaching out to people to volunteer their time to help us with exotic pest disease and insect monitoring for early detection. But what she's doing more and more of now is educating groups around how to grow a healthy citrus tree. So urban citrus growers are really important for us because they're our first line of defence. They're our first line of early detection, especially in Southern Australia. But if their citrus is healthy and grown in the right way and grown from material that is as high health as can be found, we're going to have a buffer, especially for certain citrus diseases, in terms of spread into our growing regions. So often what Jackie will do is she'll approach these groups and talk to them about ways to grow citrus, ensuring, talking about nutrition and grafting and sourcing of material, different varieties for different climates, different rootstocks for different disease tolerances. And then she will start to weave in messages about biosecurity. So we really do take a soft, gently approach. And we found that works because every time she goes to a community event, we have an online form for sign-ups for our surveillance. And I always see the form, the signed forms coming through on my email over the weekend. Oh, Jackie's at an event because we're getting all these sign-ups. So it does work, but we try and take that soft approach and start with topics that people are interested about. In terms of how we would approach these online sellers, I think it's probably a lucrative side hustle for them, so we would need to be careful. And it might start with, hey, do you want to come and, we'll do a free webinar for you guys. You can learn a bit about our industry, how to grow citrus better. So there's a bit of a win-win for them and get them a little bit interested and integrated in with our industry so they can learn about best practices.
That's fantastic, Jess. And I guess the other thing that occurs to me while you're talking is you're also creating a group of people that really care about, citrus pests, because they don't want the pests to come in. So then you're therefore more likely to get their buy-in if you do have an eradication program, because we know that everyone does love their citrus.
People love their citrus.
Yeah. People love their citrus, absolutely. Okay, so I'm going to open up. I've got some other questions in the chat, but I did want to let other people know that they're free to put some questions in the chat or even turn on your mic and ask a question. As you do think about those questions, I just want to encourage you again to focus on the idea, how the ideas might translate in your own context, what feels relevant to the challenges you're facing and what could be adapted, and where there might be opportunities to apply some of the thinking in a practical way. And I'd be really interested in people's thoughts and reflections on that, as well as the questions that you might have. So does anyone have any questions that they'd like to ask Jess? Feel free to pop up your hand. While we're waiting, Jess, I'm just going to go to the chat. So Pragya Kant has asked, your survey indicates increasing use of social media platforms for buying cuttings, etc. How would these channels, would you think these channels are good to communicate biosecurity messages and promote best practices, such as through Facebook?
Yeah, I think that if we were able to get some messaging on these platforms, I think in a lot of cases, and we got this sense through our community surveys and some follow-up interviews that we did. People want to do the right thing, they're just unaware. The more places you can get these messages out, the better. I do know that on eBay, for certain items, there is some biosecurity messaging that comes up. I don't actually know how impactful that has been. It would be an interesting study to see if it does have an impact and changes people's views about whether they should purchase or not. But yeah, I think it's something to be looked at more closely.
Thanks, Jess. Now, Brendan Rodoni has asked, are there any privacy issues in using satellite images and photos of private properties?
That's a good question, Brendan. Well, UNE have made their tree crop map public, so I would imagine they would have done their research into that and know. In terms of our citrus tree census data, what we collect from growers when they're signing up for our export program, there is a disclaimer around the use of that data for research purposes. So they know, and we make it very clear to them, we're using this information for block builder and for forecasting industry trends to give advice back to the industry. So we've never had an issue with that. In saying that, if we were to use this data in a public place like I did today, we always make sure there's no personal information. I made sure that the images that I included didn't have any road names, and we have unique IDs allocated to those blocks so that they can't be traced back to the farm in question. But yeah, we certainly all of our information is behind locked doors, so we're very careful about who has access to that.
Awesome. Justin McDonald has asked, can you share your methodology, etc.? And then in brackets, how did you monitor this and determine the range? Was it simply reviewing and collating every listing over a defined time period for the domestic seller surveys of online platforms?
Oh, yes. Sorry, I probably didn't go into that enough. So we had a 4-week period in the summer of 22-23 and also 25-26. It was the same 4-week period. I probably wouldn't have wanted to do this over the Christmas period, but that's when we were able to get some interns in to help us with this. So we had the same time frame. They basically spent their days looking through the listings and manually collecting that data, manually taking that data off the listings into a big spreadsheet where we had a lot more fields on the spreadsheet than I've presented today, and then the information around, distribution and offering delivery versus postage. It will be a yes or no, and then we've added the qualitative data next to that around, for instance, are they offering distribution or delivery locally versus interstate? Are they making reference of biosecurity regulations? So there's a lot of qualitative data in these spreadsheets, but we've tried to, I guess, semi-quantify it where possible.
Thanks so much, Jess. I hope, Justin's giving you the thumbs up there. How willing were Lavinia has asked, how willing were the commercial citrus industry to share and provide business information?
I assume that's in regards to the citrus tree census, Lavinia. As I mentioned, this has been collected since 2020, so industry is pretty well versed in supplying that information when they sign up to the export program every year. I think over time, because we release our citrus tree census booklet and we do reports and presentations to the industry on the tree census data, and to give high-level insights or industry-scale insights into the varieties planted and coming online in a few years, I think they see a real value in those insights. It really does help them make business decisions. A tree that they're planting now in 5 years' time, they don't want to be a part of the oversupply problem and competing with other citrus growers in that sense. So they are quite willing to get that information, but as I said, we have very good security for the database, which they also understand, and I think that they just have a lot of trust in Citrus Australia because we've been working with them on this kind of thing for so long.
Thanks, Jess. Now I'm going to throw you in the deep end a little bit, and I'm going to go back to the questions that I asked the participants at the start. And I'm going to ask you, if participants take just one idea from this presentation, what's the simplest way they could start applying it in their context? Because obviously you've got some experience in having done this. I'm just interested in how you would suggest people start.
That's a tricky question. Yeah. We're often faced with a situation where we have too much to do and it's all too hard. We had some burning questions within our industry that kept being brought up by our biosecurity advisory group around the online citrus sales, citrus varieties that people want but can't find, and how that's potentially linking with citrus smuggling. So for us, it was taking the advice of our, I guess, the brain's trust in biosecurity and thinking, well, how can we move ahead with this? And my philosophy has always been, it doesn't matter how small you start, just start it, and you can always stop it. You're not locked in. I've always tried to not be chained to needing funding for doing activities. Like I said, we were using interns for the online sales analysis. They got a lot out of it. They were paid, I will say that. And one of them has gone on to work in agriculture, and the other one is finishing her degree now. So they got something out of it. We got something out of it. And now it's probably time for us to start thinking about how we can take this work to the next level. But if there's a burning question in your industry, start small, and it doesn't matter how small it is.
Amazing. It feels like a really good place to finish there. I know we're a little early, although we were aiming for these sessions to be about 45 minutes, so we're hoping to give you a little bit of time back in your day. As I mentioned earlier, there is a survey, and I'm going to ask Chantel to put that in the chat now so that you can fill that out and help us out with how we can refine these sessions for you for the future. But on that note, I did want to say thank you so much, Jess, for your time. I know that you're in the last week or weeks of this job before you move on to a new role. And so I really appreciate and value the time that you've taken to join us today to share this before you do move into the new role. And good luck with that one. We hope that we can keep in touch with you in that one. I'm sure you'll all join me in thanking Jess for joining us today. And I am going to just, as a closing reflection, encourage you to take a moment to reflect on what you've heard and consider how it connects to your own work. What ideas or approaches could help you better address the biosecurity challenges you face? What practical steps could you take back to your team or your organisation? Even if the context is different, focus on the underlying principles. There may be elements that can be adapted or reimagined in your own setting. The aim is to leave today with one clear idea that you can translate into action in your context and begin applying it. And I think, Jess's advice of just start somewhere is really good advice. So thanks so much, Jess, for your time, as I said. And thank you all to all of you that came along today and gave up your time, your lunch break to listen to today's presentation. It's fantastic to have you. And like I said, if you could give us some feedback on the session, that would be amazing. Anything that can make it better for you is what we're really looking for. So thanks for your time, and I'll look forward to reading the survey results, and otherwise have a really fantastic rest of the day.
Thanks, Anne.
Thank you.
Thanks all.